Adios, 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 adios,
Good morning. Okay, we're going to try to start off on time because afterward we've got a big party to attend over at the Festa Club, so we want to make sure we make that on time. My name's John Carbone. I'm Peter Carbone's oldest nephew. My father was John, Peter's oldest brother. My mother's Jean. She's here. The family has asked me to assume the distinct honor of saying a few words about my late Uncle Pete. And we'll see if I can do this and get through it. We're here today to celebrate Uncle Pete's life. He had a long and full life. It's something all of us should be happy for. I'm going to tell you about some of the experiences of my uncle, some of the people that he loved, and really what made his life what it is and made him the person that we all love. The Greatest Generation. Some of you may have read the book written by Tom Brokaw. It was a book that he wrote about Uncle Pete's generation. The characters and the personalities of a great many of these folks that went through the things that Uncle Pete went through were developed and molded by their experiences and the times in which they lived. They grew up in the Great Depression. Many of them suffered severe hardship. Then they went off and they fought World War II. And they conquered the most awesome military force that's ever been assembled in this world. At the end of the war, they came home. They married, they raised their families, and they went to work every day. A lot of them didn't go to work because they particularly loved their jobs. They went to work in offices, in factories, to make money to raise their families. They dedicated themselves to their families and their communities. They built this country into the most formidable economic force in the world. They didn't ask for accolades. They didn't brag about what they did in the war. Matter of fact, most of them never talked about it. I don't think Uncle Pete ever talked about it when I was a kid. I never heard about it. That was part of their code. They weren't in it for honor. They did it because it was the right thing to do, and it was their duty. This group of people like Uncle Pete, something broke around the house, he didn't go replace it, he fixed it. And he wanted something that he really couldn't afford, he'd build it. I'm going to talk about a couple of situations where he did just this in a little while. All of this was done by this generation with no complaints. This was Uncle Pete's generation, and he was a part of it. The greatest generation in America. Now, Uncle Pete was born in Roseville to two Italian immigrants. A lot of you knew them. A lot of the family members are here. Vito, who came from Sicily. My grandmother Prima, whose family came from the Piedmont region of Italy. Yeah, three brothers rather. My father, John, younger brothers Frank and Ralph, who died in infancy. And they were part of a large, extended Italian family that lived in the Roseville area. We visited back and forth, spent a lot of time together, a lot of time eating and partying, having a good time. Uncle Pete attended public schools in Roseville, went to Vernon Street Elementary and Roseville High, where he played drums in the school band, and he was elected the senior class president of Roseville High. He and my father made a few bucks on the side, having a little dance band. They'd play for parties and make extra spending money. The household was located on a small farm outside of the city limits of Roseville. My grandfather, whom we always called Noni, he raised wine, grapes, fruits, nuts, vegetables, chickens. He did this after he finished his job hours at the PFE Railroad Yard, and the family always had plenty to eat. My grandmother was a spectacular cook. They delighted in having family and friends over for fabulous Italian feasts, and I guarantee you nobody ever left that house hungry. Now, Uncle Pete, when he was in high school, gained notoriety on one particular occasion when he and several of the other students decided that they were going to organize a school-wide strike because one of their favorite coaches had been, in their minds, improperly fired. So Uncle Pete and his buddies, I guess, broke into the location where they had the school band instruments and organized an impromptu march with instruments blaring. The students marched through the town, and I understand they were able to convert the allegiance of the town policeman on his motorcycle, who actually accompanied the students marching through town, instruments blaring, police siren blaring, and brought the school board around to their way of thinking. The teacher was immediately reinstituted. Uncle Pete graduated from high school in 1942. He was only 17 years old. And went to work in the shipyards, supporting the war effort as a civilian for a short time. Went into the military in 1943 at the age of 18. After testing in Monterey and training at City College of New York in Manhattan, he was trained to be a flight engineer on a B-29 bomber. And when he finished up his training, he was sent off with several other crew members to pick up a brand new airplane, B-29 aircraft in Nebraska. It was called the Salome, which was named after, I guess, a B movie of that time about an exotic dancer having that same name. Starred Yvonne DiCarlo, for those of you, maybe you actually remember that. Anyway, they picked up the airplane, they headed off west to Camp Mather, and from there to Guam, where they were assigned to the 315th Bombardment Wing, United States Army Air Corps. They were stationed at Guam for the duration of the war. Now, it was their mission, while they were there on Guam, to cripple the remaining Japanese war machine. By this time, Japan was taking some pretty hard hits and was on the ropes anyway. They were supposed to finish them off. And their job was to fly bombing raids into Japan and wipe out the oil field capacity to cut off their war productions. The B-29s flew at night under the cover of clouds and darkness. They had state-of-the-art radar so they could fly above the clouds and bomb their targets accurately. Uncle Pete and his crew flew several successful bombing raids into Japan. They hit Tokyo, Yokohama. On one particular evening, they were sent out to fly a bombing raid over Kawasaki, knock out an oil field. Supposed to be cloudy. This particular night was not cloudy. They took heavy enemy fire. They successfully knocked out the target, made it back to Guam. Way too short, the B-29s. Excuse me. They rescued 15 colonels and a general and a war correspondent. Took off from that short runway. They had to bank hard to avoid flying into the Himalayan mountains because the runway was too short. They went to the bank and the steering gear froze. They were headed to crash. Had to do an emergency repair on the fly of the steering gear and pulled into the bank successfully and made it back to Guam with the prisoners. That's always the hard part when you're talking about the war. Now we get to the good part. Following military discharge in 1946, Uncle Pete returned to Sacramento, and shortly after he got back, he was asked to serve as the best man at my parents' wedding on Labor Day in 1946 in Roseville. Now, Uncle Pete always went for a little R&R and fun, decided before the wedding that he would go on a hunting trip into Idaho with a bunch of his buddies. As the day for the wedding approached, there was no Uncle Pete. The day of the wedding rehearsal came around. Uncle Pete was still AWOL. People began to get nervous. And you know what happens in my family when people get nervous? They get real nervous. So, yeah. So, no phone calls, no Uncle Pete. Wedding rehearsal come and gone. Now I'm going to ask you people, if you remember my grandparents, you can just imagine the scene at my grandparents' house. My Nona, who on a calm day was only mildly hyperbolic, and my Noni, long-suffering, listening to her verbal onslaught. My Nona was probably there in the house, rosary beads in one hand, other hand on the forehead, pacing back and forth, swearing in Italian, yelling at my grandfather, Dio mio, Dio mio, Vito, using some of her favorite terms. Wait till I get my hands on that Peter. Remember that term she always used? Wait till I get my hands on him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. One of her favorite terms. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. I'm sure that was going on. Day of the wedding comes around. No Uncle Pete yet. Go to the church. Up shows Uncle Pete. Brand new double-breasted suit. Two-tone shoes, white and brown, wingtips. As Uncle Pete would say, using one of his favorite terms, he was slicker than snot. Came just in time to perform his best man duties, and the wedding came off successfully. In October of 1946, at a dance in Sacramento, Peter met my Aunt Mary and fell in love immediately. When he spotted Mary across the dance floor, he told the friends he was with, that one's for me, that one's mine. They became engaged on Easter of 1947 and married in August of 1947. Now once returned from the war, Uncle Pete continued a career of public service, working on military aircraft as a civilian at Mather and McClellan Fields until his retirement in 1978. After they were married, Mary continued working for a while at Pillsbury Company, and together they saved their money, and they bought a surplus military barracks up at Camp Field. My Uncle Pete and his two brothers, Frank and my father, took the barracks apart, salvaged the materials, and stored it out in my grandfather's barn until in 1953 he and Mary purchased a lot in Arden Park and built a home from the salvaged barracks building materials, spending time with his family and friends. Together with his cousin Charlie, they built a ski boat They named it Terraline after their two daughters, Terry and Charlene. And many happy days were spent water skiing at Folsom Lake, camping and fishing with the family and friends. Uncle Pete helped me learn how to ski on a single ski up at Folsom Lake in Lake Tahoe. In between water ski trips, Uncle Pete would tinker with the engine. The boat would be out in his garage, and he wanted to keep that flathead V8 running as fast as it could. He was an excellent mechanic. I can remember seeing Uncle Pete dressed in blue jeans, white t-shirt, hands covered with black grease, cigarette dangling out of his mouth, wrench in one hand, in the boat, changing oil, changing spark plugs, playing with the carburetor to coax every single extra RPM out of that engine. Kind of reminded me of James Dean the way he looked. He loved to go camping and cook outdoors and bring them home and have them ready for the next trip. Attendance by marrying the children is mandatory on these camping trips. Nobody enjoyed it more than Uncle Pete. He loved it. Matter of fact, I think probably Mary, you would have liked to stay at a hotel once in a while, but that was out of the question for Uncle Pete. No, when you went on vacation, you had to lie on the ground and look up at the stars at night. That was his kind of vacation. And Uncle Pete used to love fishing, and he used to teach all the little kids in the family how to fish. And he was always wanting me to be a fisherman. And he tried unsuccessfully to turn me into a fisherman on several occasions. He never gave up, but he should have. I remember the time he took me surf fishing out at Ocean Beach when I was about 12, and he was teaching me how to run out there and cast, and somehow I got the pole over my shoulder, cast forward, I had a big sinker on the end of the line, and it whacked me in the back of the head, split my head open, bled all over my t-shirt. That was fun. Then there was the time that he and I went trout fishing up at Lake Tahoe when I was just a little kid, and I hooked my hand. That was fun too. Then, the best of all possible fishing trips though, was the time that he talked my father into taking my brother, Jerry, and me, and my noni out on a boat fishing out of Bodega Bay. We were supposed to go out and catch lingcots, which he said were the best kind of fish to eat. Well, okay, sounds good. But we got up there, and the wind was blowing, the seas were high, it was rough. We got out, everybody on the boat was throwing up all over the place and worse. It was a sick, sick time. Uncle Pete was loving it out there. He was catching fish. He promptly decided to eat everybody else's lunch because nobody else could eat. He had a great time. The additional and extended family members are Terry's husband Greg, Tony's husband Virgil, Michael's wife Linda, granddaughter Michelle and her husband Ron, grandson Brad and his wife Leslie, granddaughter Jessica and her husband Aaron, granddaughter Elizabeth and her husband Tatsuya, granddaughter Bridget and her husband Jamie, great-grandchildren Josh, TJ, James, Allie, Caitlin, Brooklyn, Carson, Addison, Sierra, and Willow. He took great pleasure in the accomplishments of all of these family members and their achievements, no matter how small. Loved to spend time with them. It was not uncommon for them all to be assembled at Peter and Mary's home for a holiday celebration where Uncle Pete would delight in preparing feasts from my grandmother's Italian recipes for the whole family. He would be there holding court, sitting in a reclining chair, feet up in the air, remote control in one hand, like the king. Every holiday season, the family would gather, make homemade ravioli, meatballs, and red sauce, just the way my grandmother had done when we were kids. Those would be served on Christmas Eve for dinner. Every summer, Uncle Pete would grow eggplants, bell peppers, tomatoes, basil, and those would be turned into the most delicious dish, always referred to by him as melanzani. The melanzani would not only be eaten for dinner, they'd be eaten the next day for lunch on huge slabs of French bread and butter. Absolutely delicious, by the way. Uncle Pete is happy with the knowledge that his family is a rich legacy leaves behind. Through them to live his hopes and his dreams. Him and his As I said, Uncle Pete could fix anything that broke around the house. He enjoyed woodworking, building doll houses for the girls, and then when the girls grew up, he worked on their houses for them. He loved to entertain, cook. He always had frozen beer steins in the freezer. You go over to his house, walk through the door, hey, how about a beer? You go over the freezer, pull out 2 steins and pour one for you and one for himself. He loved to talk and tell stories. He was an easy person to get to know. People liked him immediately when they met him. You start talking to him. Everybody became his best friend. Just don't talk politics with Uncle Pete, especially if you're a Republican.
Amen.
Such a conversation would evoke a Jekyll and Hyde transformation with Uncle Pete. Unbelievable. This inability to engage in political conversations in a calm and rational manner is part of the DNA inherited by generations of Carbone men. Runs in the family. You know, Samuel Butler once wrote, "To die completely, a person must not only forget but be forgotten. And he who is not forgotten is not dead." Uncle Pete, we're not going to forget you. You're going to live forever in our hearts. We love you. Now, I know there's some other people that want to say a few things. We have Linda, Michelle, Jessica, and Terry all wanted to say a few things. So, who wants to start?
We're going to do a video.
You want to do the video? Okay, we're going to do the video and then they're going to say it.
What's the secret of a lasting relationship?
What's the secret?
To a lasting relationship.
I've been married 48 years and never once ever thought of divorce.
Hi, I'm Sherry, Peter's oldest daughter. It was an honor to have Peter as my father. He was there at Mercy General Hospital, pacing the floor, and got lost in the basement, so I hear, when I was born. As Dad was there when I was brought into this world, I am blessed that I was there when he left this world. Dad was not only my father, but he was a good friend. He was always there when I needed assistance, whatever you needed. To just talk to me and give me advice. We got a lot of advice. Or to come over and just help around the house. Dad taught me how to fish, paint, and I was always in the garage with him doing some type of woodwork project or out working in the yard. Dad always had a baseball game broadcasting on the radio whenever we were doing projects in the garage. We didn't talk much, we just worked together. At the hospital this past week, I spent time with him just reading him the newspaper, just holding his hand. We didn't talk much, we just sat together. I see now what they say, the saying means silence is golden. Oh, that is so true. I want to thank my mom for taking such good care of my dad. These past years have been very tough on my family. And special thanks to my sister Tony and her husband Virgil for also taking such good care of my dad. He lived a good life, and for that, we all can be very proud. I love you, Dad. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter and Mary's daughter-in-law, Linda Carbone, and I've known Peter and Mary since I was 16 years old, and they've been like second parents to me. I always enjoyed going over to Peter and Mary's house when I was a teenager because Michael was there, because of Mary's cooking, and because of Peter's stories. And of course, I like Michael's sisters too. Peter was always a rock. He had his faults, as we all do. He could be impatient, and his temper was quick. But despite that, you could always count on Peter. In good times and bad times, he was the consummate host, and he knew how to help you when you were in trouble. He wore a party hat as well as he wore his responsibilities. In every aspect of his life, Peter showed up. As a son, brother, student, employee, friend, uncle, husband, father, and grandfather. We know he showed up when it was time to serve his country. And for all those times he did show up, we thank him. Michael loved, respected, and admired his father more than any other man in his life. Peter taught Michael how to be the best man he could be. They shared the same sense of humor, the same curiosity about the world around them, the same desire to keep learning, and the same compulsion to share what they learned with anyone who would listen. When we all get to that place where Peter and Michael are hanging out together, we're all going to have a lot of stories to catch up on. But until that time, today, we honor a man who is many things to different people. But for me, he was just the best father-in-law ever. Thank you.
My name is Michelle Marable Martyr, and I'm Peter's oldest granddaughter. And I don't have anything planned today. I'm just going to speak from the heart, so bear with me. I have very fond memories of my grandfather growing up. Some of my favorite are some of the many drives with my little brother on the way to Minonia, known as Ranch, and making raviolis, camping. I caught my first fish with Grandpa, so I guess working with me on fishing was a good thing and was lots of fun. Grandpa always had a great sense of humor, and he was always there to talk to. He lived 86 years, and I feel so blessed to have been his oldest granddaughter. Thank you.
I don't know how I can follow up to all of those great speeches. So I was planning the same thing as Michelle, just kind of going through my heart. I'm Jessica. I am the third grandchild. I spent so much time with my grandparents. Every summer, I can remember, Grandpa would take me to the ranch, and he taught me how to garden. I love it to this day. That's what I do for fun. Trips. We went on a lot of trips. I was always the navigator. Whether it was good, I don't really know. Probably not, because my husband says it's terrible, but, you know, we hiked through caves. He would go the distance for me to whatever I wanted to do, whether he was tired or hot or grandma had given up, he'd still go. So I'm just very, very happy to have had so much time with him, and I'm happy that my daughter got to meet him. It's just great person to have in all of our lives. We've enjoyed spending so much time with him. So, sorry for crying. It's all you guys' fault.
Ladies and gentlemen, our fellow soldiers and I are here today to conduct a military honoring ceremony to honor a fallen veteran. Our ceremony will include the playing of taps and the unfolding, refolding, and presentation of the flag. During the playing of taps, we ask everyone who is able to please stand. All former and current military service members may render the hand salute, and at the end of taps you may be seated again for the folding and presentation of the flag. Thank you. You may stand. Please be seated.
that they built in Orange Park, which was their dream home. My dad poured all the cement and did all the cement work. That's where what he did in the Seabees when he was during World War II. That's not what he did to live, but that's he just knew how to do that.
They had a lot of projects that they did. They laid really wavy tile in the front entry. So Mother said they had too much beer, and the tile got wavy in the front entry.
My father never drank beer with me.
She's not going to rat him out.
Oh, you know
No,
what
my
I
dad
wanted
wasn't
to
involved.
get all before John left is the ski.
Oh, yes, she did.
Ski, the slalom ski. We still got over in the rafters over there, darn it. I was going to get that out.
Peter and my father made all our skis in the beginning, and they were all bent, and they were all out of fiberglass, and they were all done in my dad's garage.
And we have one left.
And we have one left. Yes.
But he's had his wine.
Okay.
That's all that matters. Okay, Virgin. Roll it again. Draining, too. Oh, okay, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Take two. A part of the caregiver's #1 rule is to have Dad's line at his chair at 5 o'clock. So we're a little late. I think we're a little past 5 o'clock, but Pete has his wine.
Not only that.
I'm sorry.
Fork or spoon.
Okay. Right. There was some regulation, cutlery that and flatware that you had to have a full-size dinner fork. You're not half-stepping with the salad fork for dinner. You had to have a full-size dinner fork.
I'm with him.
Okay. And you had to cut your grapefruit properly.
Yeah.
And everything, and I think this has reflection on somebody that he lived with for 60
Spoiled him.
ish plus 4 years. And she blames it on him, but I think it's more her having something a particular way.
Yeah.
So, there you go. We're having a toast for Dad. Again.
Go up, go down.
He also...
Wait a minute. We gotta hear it.
Mr. Carbone, I think he's my father-in-law for years. A great man. Great stories. Never
Got a fishing boat out of him because he didn't want me to die.
a fishing boat out of him. Still have it today. Probably keep it alive.
And wished your father and him had met.
Yeah, I wish my dad and him would have met. They would have been good fishing buddies, but they would have fought over the politics. Anyway, like they would say in Australia, never above you, never below you. Mr. Carbone, always with you.
Amen.
Hello.
Can't forget that part.
Amen.
Super close.